think everybody knows who I am, but I'm Debbie Lillo, and I am the Church Relations Coordinator for our Bay Area office. And I get to walk alongside of churches and help them embrace families. And we really are about embracing the whole family. And so today, we have gathered, I'm going to pull myself over here. We have gathered a group of siblings of all ages, some teenagers, some young adults. And Mrs. Crawford has offered to, Rebecca has offered to be a parent to give us some insight into parenting a child with disabilities as well as their siblings. And we're really here today, like I said in my prayer, to be an encouragement. You guys who are raising a family are doing a great job, and we're here to encourage you, and we're here to help you understand that these kids were placed in your family with value and purpose, both your child or adult with disabilities and their brothers and sisters. And what we're basing today, you should have two handouts. You should have one that says typical thoughts, things I think about, and one that says embracing siblings of children affected by disabilities. The first one we're not going to hardly refer to at all. This is the basis. The research one is a full workshop that I've done on siblings. But it gives you sort of the background for what I found in research to be true of siblings. But I'm not one. I've come to realize that I was first attracted to the sibling. The reason I'm drawn to siblings is because I am a child of a mother with disabilities. She wasn't able to raise me because of her disability. And as a result, I helped to raise my younger brother. And it was only at about 45 or 50 as I was working with kids with disabilities that I realized that part of my passion came from my mother's disability, which at the time I didn't even recognize as that. So I can relate to these guys, but really they're the experts. God's given me some insight through research that you have in this paper. But really the panel today is, and we had our first sibling panel last July. And this is our second sort of figuring out what works and doesn't work. And Katie Burke, Katie, raise your hand. Katie was an STM last July and is a SIB herself and has a passion for this. And so she and I have been interacting all year. And she's the one that wrote these questions that you have in your other handout. And really we're basing the sibling panel on these questions. And we're going to give the siblings a chance to we're not going to read through them, but to respond to some of these topics. And so before Katie will explain the handout a little more, but first I'd like the siblings to each introduce themselves to you, so you get a sense of who they are and where they fit into their families. So go ahead.
Thank you, Debbie. My name is Katie Burke, and I am in my 20s, and I have a younger brother who has cerebral palsy. He is on the more severe end of the spectrum. He has a mind of at most a 1-year-old, and he lives at home with my parents, who are his full-time caretakers.
Hi, I'm Charlene. I just turned 20, and I have a younger sister with autism. She's on the lower side of the spectrum, so she still lives at home. We just applied for conservatorship, actually. So she just turned 18, so we're going to do that in August. And I live at home with them still.
My name is Jasmine Tell, and I'm 22. I have 5 siblings with disabilities, from spina bifida to fetal alcohol syndrome, PTSD.
I'm Abel Olstad. I'm 15, and I have an older brother who has spina bifida.
I'm Joy. I'm 16, and I have 3 siblings with cerebral palsy and autism.
Good. Thank you. Why don't you pass the mic back to Katie? Before we go through the hand, I'm going to let Katie explain a little bit how this works and maybe even refer back to the quotes in the back so they understand what all is here. The encouragements in the back of the handout.
Okay. Thank you. Debbie's great research was a great tool to be able to look at it from a SIB perspective and say, what does her research look like in my world as a SIB? And so what I did was, this is not an inclusive list by any means, and there are things on here that many people wouldn't resonate with as a typical SIB. But what I wanted to do was just give us an opportunity to raise some awareness of things that we may be thinking about, maybe not. Maybe we have thought about it, maybe we don't think about it anymore, or maybe we will in the future. It's hard to know where we are in that journey of being a typical SIB, but maybe this can be a tool for identifying that a little bit. And I did want to go ahead and point out as well that in the back, definitely want to point out that there is truth for typical sibs, and definitely wanted to bring scripture in to say this, how do we combat the lies that the enemy will bring at us? They can come from anywhere, they can stem at any time, and the truth is right here to remind us of what that is about.
Okay, so what we're going to do, if you'll take out your handout, the typical thoughts, things I think about. We're going to go section by section. We're not going to read the questions, but I'm going to prompt our panel with the topic. So the first topic is thoughts about God. These are things that having a brother or sister with disability caused you to think about God, and maybe how that's changed over time, how you've grown into those thoughts.
Growing up, I struggled to some extent with wondering, why my family was that way. And about 4 years ago, one of my brothers who had a disability died rather suddenly. And I mean, having siblings with disability, you question God. Having your sibling with a disability die, you really, really question God. And but through that process, God just showed me so much of his love and so much of his plans for our lives. And it really made me realize that no matter what happens, it's part of God's plan, and it's a beautiful plan.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything they want to add to how having a brother or sister with disability has caused you to ponder God? No?
As I read through these statements, I realized how much I took a cue from my parents in responding to this, and responding to how God could have allowed this to happen in my family. And my parents were very open to healing for my brother. I remember several occasions where people at church would come up to them and say, "Oh, well, can I pray for him to get well?" And of course they would say, "Sure, by all means." But they really modeled for me this sense of, this is God's plan. We accept this, and we believe in God's sovereignty. They didn't use those words, but they demonstrated it by their actions and by their faithfulness. And I internalized that. It was never a conversation or a discussion. Maybe that would have been helpful too. But for me, I don't think that any of these things I spent a lot of time wrestling with necessarily.
I hope that's an encouragement. The second section is thoughts about self. So how did having a brother or sister with disabilities, or how does it cause you to think differently about yourself or question things about yourself? I think Charlene was going to start us off.
So for me, it's just me and my sister. So I'm the older one, my sister's the younger one. And I think for me, it was just hard because there are other families that I've met that, like, whether through speech therapy or church, but they all had more than one sibling. There was that were typical. Like, there was like either the disability was like in the oldest one or somewhere in the middle or the youngest, and they always had other siblings. So for me, I was just like, well, it's just me. And a lot of times I would actually play cards by myself. I would set up Monopoly boards and like put my stuffed animals there, and I would play all 4 people just because, my parents didn't have time, or I just wanted someone to play with. And it was kind of hard. And there were times I was just self-conscious because I was like, I want to talk to my friends about it because they all have brothers and sisters, but it's like I would talk about it. They would just kind of give me these dazed looks on their face. And I was like, okay, they're trying, but they don't really get it. But when I came here, it's great because this is the first time I've really experienced, I can talk about my sister like all day, and everyone here gets it, whether they're typical siblings themselves and they really get it, or they're not, but they've worked with kids with disabilities. It's great because they're so understanding, and it's a privilege, and I'm really glad that I'm here.
Anyone else? Self-awareness?
I know growing up, I think when I was really young, I was embarrassed by my siblings. I took it as something that reflected on me, and it was embarrassing because they were different. And then as I got older, it became this really neat thing, especially becoming involved with Joni and friends. You talk about your siblings, and they think that's a neat thing. They think that, wow, you got to grow up with that, or your sibling's so awesome. And, for me, it made me feel a lot more like where I had been defined by my siblings in a negative way. and I've been defined in a positive way because of them and their influence in my life.
Okay. We're going to let Katie talk about thoughts about parents. We thought that that was probably fair since her parents are far away. Katie, why don't you get us started thinking about how this affected your thoughts about your parents?
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and read a couple of statements that resonate most with me. It would be number 1 and number 4. So I'm going to read it. Number 4 says, "You don't do anything too bad or too good so as not to add to your parents' burden." And what specifically in the too good part, you think, what do you mean too good? And I think I was always afraid of doing something that would put myself in a spotlight or add to my responsibility. I mean, you think about if your child makes the cheerleading team, all of a sudden there's practices and there's finances and there's things that go into that. And so I can resonate with the fact that there's probably a few things that maybe even subconsciously I didn't achieve for, didn't strive for, because, again, only subconsciously I didn't want to add to my parents' burden. And then number 1, you fear letting your parents down. And again, this was all, my parents are wonderful, and I would tell them that, and I would say all of this if they were sitting right here. But there's so many times where I'm fine, and Katie's fine was kind of the standard. There wasn't a whole lot of invitation for me to voice maybe things that could have been going on, and part of that was because I didn't have a list like this to say, oh, I understand. Oh yeah, I resonate with that too so much, and this is not even a typical SIB thing, it's just a people thing, but you don't understand how you're feeling or that you feel a certain way too unless someone else names it, you know what I mean? And so even just a few months ago, I remember I was just struggling with something, and I finally called my mom, and she said, well, how long have you felt this way, or what's been going on? And I said, oh, and I gave her the time period, and she said, Katie, why haven't you told me this before? And I said, oh. And I realized subconsciously that it was because, again, that was me wanting to protect my own parents. So it's just been an interesting thing that I'm still realizing to be open and to sharing with that. Yeah. That's it.
Anybody else? I think I would say that that's the one that, as I work with siblings, I see most often. Is particularly the older siblings, but really we have a lot of younger kids being the older sibling to the older brother or sister to their sibling with disabilities. There's this protectiveness in this not wanting to make things worse in the family. I shared last year the story that I have a friend who has a little girl. Oh, she's not a little girl anymore. She just graduated from high school, but their daughter knew that they were struggling financially, and she broke her arm. And so she didn't tell her parents for a good 24 hours that she broke her arm because she didn't want to go to the doctor, because she didn't want to cause a financial burden, because she had taken on that sense of responsibility, and she was protecting her family, protecting her parents. And I think that's for me, one of the things I'm hoping that as we walk alongside, we're giving kids some other people to talk to, so there's not those situations if they're feeling that, and can help work them through and help them know Mom probably does want to know about it. Like, your mom really would have loved to have known. So I hope that's one of the things we can be giving tools to kids with. Anything else about parents? Yeah. Charlie?
So when I was reading that particular section, I actually didn't resonate completely with any of them, and I was thinking about, like, why is that? I think because my parents tried as hard as they could. I'm actually very privileged because as much as I wanted to help take care of my sister, I was like, oh, what can I do? My parents were like, no, you need to have your own life. Do this, feel free to do what you want to do. We will support you. And there were times I was just like, but it conflicts with, the bus schedule and, all these other things. But they were very open to, it's okay. You can go to church. You can serve. You can do this. And I spent a lot of time with my dad at church because my mom wanted me to get out of the house, go do something. And actually, I think it's important, too, that other members of your family get involved. I was actually having dinner with my aunt the other day, and she was actually telling me all these things that my parents never told me, just of things that they were fighting about, or that she's the one that initiated them to go out so she could babysit me and my sister, so my parents could have a time out just to themselves. And I think that's really important, that it's not just like parents who like matter. There's other, you can get your support from like other members of your family. That's helpful.
When I've been at family retreats before and parents have realized that I am a typical sibling serving in as STM or on leadership, they always usually have a lot of questions. And one of the things that I always try and encourage them with is that in my own journey as a sibling, I didn't really feel like it was so much on my parents and how I came to terms with dealing with that, but more of my own relationship with Christ. Because I realized a lot of my own resentment was more based on my own selfishness rather than anything that I was actually missing out on. And so my parents did an awesome job making sure that that could be the case, that it was more of my heart issues than more of my environment that I was in. And so to the parents that do struggle with that, because you're already raising a child with a disability and then you're trying to figure out, what do I need to do right with my typical children, the pressure's not all on them. A lot of that you can give up to God and realize that He's going to take care of it.
Anything to add to that? I would also add that not just the family, but also the family of God. This is where the church can come in. This is where the church can walk alongside and help with that faith development, help be encouragers as extended family, like your aunt and your uncle. Good. Thoughts about my sibling with disabilities. Joanna, I think, was going to get us started on that.
So the first one says, at times you are both protective and embarrassed by your sibling. And I've had times where that is completely 100% true, where I need to feel like I need to protect my siblings out in public as well as feel kind of embarrassed by them. It's kind of a weird feeling at the time because you want to protect them from people who do stare and people who do make fun of kids with disabilities, but also you're kind of embarrassed because they do have disabilities and you do feel different and you do stand out. But like I've learned that I'm not embarrassed by them. I've learned that it's just I don't have to be embarrassed by them because they're my family and I love them. So.
Anybody else? Charlene.
It was really funny because I used to think that, I need to make sure my sister's okay. It was like when I was with my parents and I was like, if anyone else like tried to come near my sister, I was just like, I needed to like make sure that they were like, approved, like they were going to be okay, like she was going to get hurt type of thing. It's really funny because so I'm an STM this year, it's my first year, so I have a typical sibling. And when the family first got here, so her younger sister also has autism, so she was just running around here with her STMs, and their parents were like, "Are you sure?" And so we reassured them that it would be fine. And so as we were kind of playing around, and then so my camper says to me, "Oh, I need to make sure I follow them." And I started laughing in my head because I was like, I know that exact feeling. It's just you want to make sure, like, you've never met these people in your life, and you're like, this is the first time I camp. It's like I don't want anything to happen to my sister. It's funny just because I had all these like flashbacks of like when I was small, just like I didn't want anything to happen, and I couldn't think of any particular scenario, but it's just that feeling of like not wanting to let go. But obviously, like as I got older, then I learned that it's not, you have to trust other people. But yeah.
And that's a perfect segue. If we'll flip the page. Part of the excitement of thinking about siblings and what their role is in the family is, as you see right here, God uses these things. God uses the struggles their family goes through and the nurturing that they have to do at maybe a younger age to develop some really wonderful things in our sibs. And the more we encourage them, the more we give them the tools, the more likely they're going to become these compassionate, incredible adults, and God's going to be able to use them fully. So that the typical thoughts, my different life, really focuses on some of that. It focuses on how am I different because I have a brother or sister in a positive way. How am I different? So the first statement, I notice I'm different than other people my age because of my experience with my sibling with disabilities, and give some suggestions. And I think Jasmine was going to get us started on that.
Well, because of my siblings having disabilities, it's completely changed my life. I started serving with Joni and friends when I was 16 and went on to do about 18 of their family retreats, 5 of their Wheels for the World trips. And on one of those trips, I met my now husband, and we live in Thailand permanently, serving in a full-time disability ministry, all because of my amazing siblings with disabilities.
Super. Doesn't have to be that big of a story, but I actually would like each of you to think of one way that having your brother or sister has enriched your life, something that tools it's given you that you can see how God's developing you into something you might do differently as you grow up. So whoever wants the mic next.
So for a long time, I questioned why my sister was autistic. And I didn't really think it was like a super big deal, but there were just times in my life I was just like, why is this happening? I think when I got to like 13, so that's like 7th, 8th grade, I realized that I ended up where I was because my sister was autistic. And that's actually why I came to Christ, because initially I was like, oh, God can fix my sister. Then I can have a normal life and then I'll be fine. But as I got older, then I realized that just like how things were working out, I ended up at like the schools I was going to, and because I ended up at those schools, I ended up finding out what I really like to do in music, and I ended up and my major now is in digital audio technology. And I was thinking about it, and I go, okay, if my sister was normal, would any of that happen? And yeah, it could have, but I stopped thinking about that actually recently. Like there was a long time where I was like, okay, what if my sister was normal? And I would like have all these imaginations, and then I finally came to the realization like in the last year or so that, that's not important. God did not do that. God has a purpose, and I've just seen it come to fruition, I suppose, and continuing to just blossom in my life.
Isn't that what we hope we collectively can bring out in all of our kids? Katie?
There's been a lot of really neat benefits that I have just noticed and will continue to notice, I'm sure, as I get older, about how my life is different because of Andy being in my life. And I think a few things. One is seeing the ultimate faithfulness of my parents to each other, knowing how many parents go through divorce. In fact, even within my extended family, disability has also affected our extended family, and seeing a marriage completely crumble. And having that experience just a few years ago, realizing, wow, that could have been my parents' story, and it's not at all. They are so faithful to each other, such a great example. And not only just the mom as a caretaker, but also my dad, seeing him so compassionate and so loving towards my brother. He knows just as much how to fill out a hospital chart as my mom does. They share in those responsibilities with each other. That's been really, really cool for me to see. And then also my involvement here has definitely been as a result of that. There'd be no way that I would have even thought to have been a part of this camp if it wasn't for my brother, and just knowing how much families need support and need a break.
Super. Pass it this way. Go ahead and bring it all the way to Joanna, and then we'll bring it back this way.
So with my siblings having disabilities, I noticed I'm a lot more mature than my peers, especially at school. I noticed by being more mature, I can handle a lot more responsibility. And kids my age at school usually drink or do drugs and ditch just because they can, and they think they're teenagers and they think they're invincible. But I don't do any of that stuff because I'm more mature, and I know that stuff's not going to get me anywhere in life. And if I didn't have the siblings, and if I wasn't as mature as I am now, I probably would ditch class. But I realized that by being more mature, it's helped me more than anything. And I do thank my family for that, and my siblings for being the way they are, because without them, I probably wouldn't be here meeting all these cool people and be where I am now.
Thank you, Joy. Abel?
I definitely think that having a sibling with a disability makes me more accepting of other people. Growing up, you see a lot of people on the street who, when there's someone who needs help, they'll just leave them and pay no attention. But definitely having a sibling with a disability has made me more accepting of them and willing to help, because I know because I live with it every day. like how to help and what they need and stuff like that.
Super. It's been fun. Several of you, it's been fun to watch that process and watch you grow up to be the young woman you are. Good. I want to invite Rebecca to come up for a second. Maybe pass the mic down to her. Last year was our first sibling panel, and we had several parents who attended. But Rebecca's the only one here this week who did, and since she's also represented on the panel with her daughter, we thought it would be nice to have a parent give their perspective both. I'm going to ask her a couple questions, but kind of both in terms of whether anything was different this year, having thought about it in different ways after the panel, but also whether just kind of her insights into how you support, we might better support siblings. So, Rebecca, maybe start with words of wisdom that you've learned as you've raised one or two kids with disabilities and several siblings.
One of the things that when I was thinking about being on this panel is we had two typical children when our daughter Jamie Lynn was born with spina bifida, and that was back in '86, and we had homeschooled for two or 3 years, and at that time that worked perfectly because she had multiple surgeries, multiple hospitalizations, and we just packed up the kids and went to the hospital, and they thought it was a great time out because they had TV and we didn't have TV at home, so they just had a great time. So we just tried to, include them in all her care and things like that. But then after the sibling panel, I got to thinking about our older kids, and Jacole, Jabin, and Jocelyn are 16, 18, and 20. And these last 2 or 3 years have been really, we've struggled a lot with our son's death, and Jamie Lynn had a 40-day hospitalization the next year, and then losing Jasmine across the world. And so I made the decision to put our 4 little ones in the public school. And, it's worked out pretty good because I have a close relationship with the teachers, and that way I can spend a lot more time with the big kids. And we've been canoeing and blackberry picking and just all kinds of cool things. So that was one thing that I think came out of that.
Anything else you want to add besides that? Okay, I think we're going to take questions, and that might come. I'm going to have you stay there as part of the panel for the questions. Before we go to questions and answers, because I'm going to give my mic out to people to speak. Do be encouraged. Katie did a great job with biblical truths to encourage all of us as both people who love siblings and siblings themselves. So I encourage you to go through this and maybe take it as a devotional time. I also want to show some resources. Right now, I am yet to find real good faith-based resources on siblings. There's the whole Sib Shop programs that are great. They do a good job of explaining what disabilities are and giving kids a chance to talk, but they stop short of pointing them to Christ. They stop short of telling kids that God created them perfectly and put them in the perfect family and is developing them into who he wants them to be. And I'm hoping that we're trying to write some curriculum now for the churches to start some faith-based Sib Shops. So for right now, this is all that's out there. The same group, their book that I think is the best is called Living with a Brother or Sister with Special Needs. And it goes through every disability and defines it as a child would define it. So it gives a simplified version of what is spina bifida, what is cerebral palsy. So I just give you this as a resource, and I have a couple books of stories written by Sib. So if you want to come up later and look at those, they're available for you. We want this to be as much for whoever's in the audience. We want you to be encouraged. We don't want you to be feeling like this is an indictment or we're telling you need to do things better or different. We're hoping there's some younger parents who might find it encouraging to see that at the end of the walk, brothers and sisters of kids with disabilities have turned out more mature and with great characteristics. But you've got to have some questions. So we're going to open it up now for questions and answers. And you guys just have the mic, and whoever wants to pipe in can do so. Are there any questions? Or not? Quiet group. In the back.
The whole sibling thing's been on my mind and my wife's mind for quite some time. This is our first Joni and Friends camp, so it's all new to us. Could you add to what you've already said by maybe each of you giving me sort of if I could have it all over again and have my parents do one more thing I really wish they had or I really wish they hadn't, fill in the blank. Is that a reasonable question?
We got a similar question last year, and it was also from a young dad who asked the question in a more specific way: how did you find out, or how did your parents tell you about your sibling with a disability? And that's going to look differently for each of us because of birth order. But for me, I was 3 years old when Andy was born, and I don't remember a time differently. When he wasn't in my life, I was 3, and I don't remember ever knowing he was any different than he was, and it has been. But I think for me, it would have been helpful at age-appropriate levels to have explanations of what does it mean to have cerebral palsy? What does his life look like? But in many ways, I understand my parents didn't even know that. There's probably a lot more resources today than there were 26 years ago. I just gave my age. Okay. But I think that would be something. But overall, I would say I would just echo what Jasmine said and say ultimately it's our thing to make sure that we have our relationship with the Lord dialed in. And of course, just like in Proverbs, it says, train up a child in the way that they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. And that's not a promise, that's a principle. And so I would say just you asking the question says a whole lot about you and your parenting.
I think for me, something I wish my parents had done is spend more time with me. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. It kind of sounds that way. But I think it's just because I just saw, more specifically my mom. Because my parents did the best they could. My mom wanted me to spend that time with my dad to get out of the house and everything. So they did what they could. But I think for me, just because I'm a girl, I'm the oldest sister. I think for me, if my mom spent more time with me, I would have really valued that. And I kind of never brought it up just because, I was at church busy. I had things to do. It wasn't really occupying like my entire life or anything. But I think as I got older, I talked to my mom about it, and she appreciated that I mentioned it because she actually had no idea that I was feeling that way at all. And one of my things is quality time with other people is really important for me. So I think just being open about would you like us to spend time with you, or just simple, even like if they played a game with me and then went away, I would have been fine. So small stuff I think really is helpful.
I would kind of have to go with what Katie said. I think one of the things that I really wish I had, mostly as a very young child, is I wish I would have understood more about my sister's disability, because I really struggled with my older sister's cognitive delays. It really, really bugged me. And I think it would have been really good for me to fully understand why that was, how it was affected, what things she did were because of that. And I think I would have been a lot more patient and accepting if I had had that.
There really isn't anything that I wish they'd done because they're good parents.
For my family, I would say I wish my parents spent more family time, as an entire family together. Go on more vacations, because our goal was to go once a year, to a vacation somewhere to Hawaii or like somewhere so we can all hang out, which we didn't really get a chance to do because three of my siblings have disabilities, so that was kind of always a challenge. But like probably just more family time, that's important, and nothing beats family time with the entire family. So
Super. Anything else? Okay. Other questions? So thank you to our panel. I want to encourage you that throughout the week we're being very intentional about our support for siblings. So Katie is working with our teenage typical sibs, and actually Joey is helping her out. Every morning they're in the teen program and addressing some of these issues, and actually this handout's going to become part of what they start working with a little bit in the evening, so they have their 9 o'clock time together. Our children break off with me in the morning, and we're doing some fun but also some good discussion questions about being a sib. They have the typical sib tonight. We really, like I said, really are about, Joni and Friends, really about embracing the whole family. And so we're hope that each of you, that as moms, you're getting time as moms, as dads, that you're getting time as dads, but that our sibs are getting the time to be supported as sibs. So thank you for coming. Thank you. Can we give a hand to our young... This is a pretty vulnerable thing to do. It's a very vulnerable thing to get up and share kind of raw what's inside of you. But I'm so encouraged that this is something that I think we'll keep doing, and I think it's going to look different every time because we have a different group here. But thank you for taking the time to listen. Thank you, Mike, for recording it for us. It'll be exciting to see how we might be able to use this in the future. Thank you.